heard a lot of practicality of federal court versus military commission. I was glad to hear a good word about the military commission. We've got problems another way. Isn't there an overriding policy question? Are we at war? Bin Laden declared war on us twice in the 1990s and committed acts which are acts of war. Recently, Obama said, yes, we're at war with Al-Qaeda. Isn't that an overriding consideration? I mean, Lee and Rifkin wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. Enemy combatants, federal defenders. Isn't it an overriding consideration? Are we at war? Which would dictate, I think, if that's the overriding concern, that we use military commissions as opposed to the federal court. I open it up to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with this because, you know, one way I got to know the Federalist Society was several debates with John Yoo, who pushes the war metaphor as a career. We are not at war in a traditional sense. This is not World War I. This is not World War II. In a traditional sense, war is nation states in armed conflict where tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people die and whole countries are mobilized, okay? This is terrorism. And if, you know, and in fact, not that I would necessarily support it, but the response of most countries to terrorism is some sort of intermediate system, a kind of junior varsity civilian system, which is true of almost any country I can think of. And if you're asking, well, you know, are things different? Yes, things are different now, largely because of technology. Okay, but in Northern Ireland, just about every family was touched by terrorist violence in one way or another in 30 years there. And did the British declare war on the Irish Republican Army? No. In fact, the British were at pains to treat it as a domestic civilian problem. So what I don't want to do on the one hand is minimize the danger and the threat. But on the other hand, the problem with easy war metaphors, as John Yoo exemplifies, is when you say war, people's eyes glaze over, and countless corollaries follow, okay, including the impossibility of trying these people as criminals. And that's what I want to resist. I want to acknowledge that they're not ordinary criminals. But just to say war and use that term clouds the issue more than clarifies it.
Vince, do you want to?
The problem is that it's gray. On 9/11, we were stuck with two sets of law, the law of armed conflict and the civilian criminal system. And the truth be told, neither one really fits. What if one of these bombers were an American citizen? The MCA only applies to unprivileged enemy belligerents, alien enemy unprivileged belligerents. It will take a large-scale attack by an American citizen to force us to really think about that. So where we are now, and I think it's congressionally too hot to touch, where we are now is we need to have both options, civilian trials, military commissions. I just happen to disagree with the choice of the civilian trial for KSM.
How you can say we're at war after 9/11, Congress passed a resolution declaring we're at war, and President Obama very recently said we're at war with Al-Qaeda, so I don't know how.
No, my point is I said we are not in war at in a traditional sense.
But in a sense, the enemy is more dangerous because they purposefully target the civilian population. When they didn't kill 3,000, but they killed 50, then we just 50,000, then we'd be at war, 100,000.
Well, the Soviet Union targeted every city in America. Okay, and were we at war with the Soviet Union?
Yes.
Well, no, we were not in the sense that, you know, the diminutions, you know, that one associates with war, you know, during World War II, we interned Japanese Americans because we were at war and the Supreme Court validated it. And the reason the Supreme Court validated it was we were at war. That's what Justice Black said. We have to defer to the military's judgment since we are at war and war is hard on everybody. Now, if we say that war means war means war. And actually, Vince and I entirely agree on this. This is something in the middle, a gray area. Does that mean then that if the military or the executive branch says that we should intern every Arab or every person in the United States of Arab ancestry, that that is legitimate and appropriate because, gee, after all, we're at war? That's just one of the dozens of corollaries that follow when you just say war. And that's what I want to resist.
Well, when you go and you look at the founders and you look at their
This
They-
was
they-
exactly
they-
what the
they-
founders
they
proposed.
precisely didn't want the issue of national security to be in the realm of the judiciary. They wanted, and you yourself said in your speech that that's something.
The founders didn't want a
that's
standing
in the
army.
realm of
The
Congress and
founders did not want a standing army.
Let me
So-
Can I just comment briefly on the war question, just very briefly?
One question and then I'll bring up.
Taking it from the level of this is not as traditional kind of war down to what we're doing, of course, these during this conflict, people whom we removed from the battle were entitled to hold until the end of the duration of the conflict. And that is traditional law of war. At some point, in a conflict like this, that principle is going to be pressed upon pretty hard. I don't know when that will be. I think it will depend on what Justice Kennedy thinks is a good idea. Pardon me? It's true. But I just have to say very briefly that I think it's a wild kind of overreading of Korematsu in the case at the time to say that the court said anything the government says during war goes. First of all, those cases are viewed as a mistake. Second, it would require an assessment of the government, a pretty heavy-duty assessment of the government's argument for a program that would target people according to race or ethnicity, which I can't imagine being upheld.
My point was to use a clear example to show that there are many corollaries that follow. One of which is you intern someone till the end of the conflict. Well, when are we not going to be at war? This is going to be a war. Every military person I've talked to has said this is a war that's never going to end. So then we must reconcile ourselves to the fact that the United States, for the rest of time, will be in a state of war, if not with Al-Qaeda, with other cells of terrorists who have access to technology, and then adjust our constitutional expectations accordingly.